So I'm not going to waste a lot of time introducing the panelists because everybody basically knows who they are already. But from the end, Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks, Jonathan Kraft, owner of the New England Patriots, Daryl Morey, the owner of this conference, and also general manager of the Houston Rockets, Bill Polian, who's been a friend of mine for a little while now, who's the president of the Indianapolis Colts, and Bill Simmons, who I've just for the first time met in person, owner of himself, I think, which is the most valuable property probably in the room. Daryl has asked me to come to this for a couple of years, and I haven't. And I'm a little shocked by what's here. I thought it was a handful of geeks in a room. And this thing has gotten so big, and that it's hard to know kind of what to make of it. And when he told me sort of how big it had gotten, it occurred to me that there's something going on in this wing of sports management that probably threatens it. That once you get a certain number of like-minded people in a room, it's very hard to, it gets claustrophobic. And so he asked me to put a title to the panel, and I thought, well, why don't we just try to argue against the movement? So I think we've called the panel "What the Geeks Don't Get: The Limits of Moneyball." And not that I actually can think of anything myself. I get interviewed about this book all the time, and the tone of these interviews about Moneyball and Moneyball Spawn has changed over the years. In the beginning, there was a lot more hostility, but now usually it's people coming at me wanting to write about the cultural consequences of Moneyball, and there's inevitably a question somewhere in the interview, usually towards the end. Well, you know, you've written this book, you've had 6 years now to think about, what might be wrong with it. Can you tell me some things that you would do differently, or what's wrong with this thing now that you've had time to think about it? And I can never think anything. I kind of sit and try to think of it. And so I thought, I kind of like it the way it is. And so I thought that with this collection of strong-minded people, I might get an answer to that question. And I thought one way to start the conversation, and I think I told Bill we might start with him, but I told him 2 minutes ago. Great. And I also told everybody on this panel not to prepare anything. So we're going to be largely winging it. Oh, and one other note up front. It seems to work better to have the questions, to not do the audience interaction the way it's been done, because you got to repeat the questions and so on and so forth. So if anybody who would like to ask questions of the panel, write them down. They'll find their way right up here, and we will work them into the conversation in the middle of the conversation. So you do that now. And
so what you're saying is you don't want to prepare either, and you want the audience.
But I have a lot I'd like to talk about, but if it gets dull, they'll help us. And it will get dull. There isn't a panel in the world that doesn't get dull. But
not this one.
Well, we'll see. But Bill, here's my question. My question is, Bill Simmons first. There's this thing that's happened in sports. I mean, look at this. This didn't exist 10 years ago. It is a kind of revolution in sports management. You write about sports. You're an observer of sports culture. What is it you dislike most about the people in this room?
I like the people in this room.
Yeah. Or what they represent. What bothers you or disturbs you about the geekification of
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate everybody here for breaking the most dudes in one conference room record.
Yes.
We're all winners today. It's a tough question because I have multiple answers to it of things that bother me about it. I think ultimately it's a great thing, but I think the thing that's bothered me the most lately about the statistical revolution is that they don't seem like most of the time there's no real impetus to try to make the statistics, the formulas, whatever you've come up with, relatable to people who maybe, aren't brilliant or aren't somebody who have like a huge statistical background. I mean, I took statistics in college. I lasted 3 weeks. I dropped out. I got out of it because it was like just too much for me. And I think that's going to be the challenge this decade is, yeah, you've created this awesome formula, but I'm trying to understand it right now, and there's division signs, and there's things being multiplied. And at some point, it's like, you have to make me understand in a relatable way why this makes sense. So I want to see where that goes, because I think, you know, the formulas seem like they're getting more and more complex, especially in baseball. I mean, I love the Baseball Prospectus book. I get it every year. It's really hard to read. Like, I almost feel like it's like I'm like taking a college course trying to understand all the stuff in it. And that's what I want to see from this next decade.
So what bothers you is not so much the actual intellectual activity, is that the unwillingness to communicate it to large.
I think there's an onus on whoever is dispersing that information.
Right.
That you're not dispersing it just for the other people who are on your level, who are on your intellectual level, who are on your number level, whatever, but for people like me or for my dad who, you know, maybe they love basketball, but maybe they don't understand what your offensive, whatever formulas are, whatever. I think that for people, for the stat people to really go to the next level, they're going to have to relate to everybody and not just the people that understand it.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I think that makes sense,
I'm asked
right?
the same question of everybody on the panel, because you all have, you're all on the interface of this. You're all on the edge in your sports of the use of statistical analysis and the reevaluation of old methods of both valuing players and valuing strategies. But no doubt, like me, there are things that make you slightly uncomfortable, that have caught your eye about this new movement. And I'd love to hear sort of what bothers you most about it. Why don't we go with you, Mark? You're easily botherable, so I think there must be something about it that upsets you.
Just one thing that, you know, the other teams won't tell me exactly what they're doing. That you got to work hard to figure it out. No, there's nothing, you know, it's an opportunity. And like anything else, you have to put in the time. I think, you know, you can checklist some things that we're all bothered by, in basketball anyways. You know, we're all trying to enhance the same play-by-play data. And so it's bothersome that the NBA keeps track of the same things they've been keeping track of forever, despite the fact that there's 30 teams who are trying to make better use of the data. So they could save all of us a lot of time and money if they would track deflections or this or that and make our life a whole lot easier. So that's kind of bothersome. But other than that, I mean, it only bothers me that Darryl won't tell me all his formulas and everything he's doing, and, you know, from a competitive perspective.
Jonathan, do you have a thought on this subject? Is there anything that occurs to you?
I don't think anything really bothers me about it. I think football, in a lot of respects, is really different than the other sports in that the quantifiable performance data of players and statistics in general are probably secondary when you're looking at football players to things that are more difficult to measure, like mental toughness, ability to learn, ability to persevere. Everybody has to be above a basic athletic threshold by position to step on the field in the NFL, and then it really comes down to the subjective stuff. I think where the statistical data and trying to do analysis really comes into play in football relates to, until this year, having a salary cap and thinking about how to take that scarce resource and deploy it more effectively than your competition. It's very different than the other sports. And I think that when you look at the public try to apply the same geekified measures, or whatever the right term is, to our sport versus others, and because the contract data and the rules of the salary cap aren't known in the public, I think you might get a little annoyed when you see people try to do analysis with only half of the picture. But
so you think there are limits in football that there aren't in other sports?
I think that the subjective parts of measuring a player are much greater in football. And I'm saying this without any knowledge of basketball, but I mean, I watch a baseball game and it's 9 individuals performing a specific skill that can be greatly measured, and how they work together is much less important. And the effort that goes into each game and the work that you never see that goes into each game, in my opinion, in football is much greater than it is in the other sports, and it comes down to measuring a lot of other things.
Because in of course, there are lots of baseball scouts that would tell you that measuring a baseball player is a subjective art, and that and they've been largely rolled over in the last 4 or 5 years. But
they're the ones who didn't like your book. But
yeah,
I would respectfully disagree with them.
Oh, so
knowing nothing about baseball.
Well, we'll come back. I'm going to come back to Daryl. I'm going to come back to Daryl, but I would like to go to Bill Pulliam because it's the same sport. Do you agree with that? That there's sort of like that football is in some ways inoculated against this movement because it's always going to be less measurable, more inherently subjective?
No, not in total.
See, the Colts and the Patriots always.
Yeah,
No, it's just the way he phrased the question. These organizations, despite the fact that we're great rivals, I think are very similar in the way they approach personnel management and personnel decisions. I think you have to divide football into two distinct areas: personnel evaluation and management, which would include the salary cap, and on-field game management, tactics, strategy, etc. And this is not a commercial for Michael, but he got it exactly right in Moneyball.
Oh, no.
As far as personnel selection is concerned, because you do, under the salary cap, have to find undervalued assets. You have to break the mold. You have to find some way to get enhanced bang for the buck. Jonathan alluded to that. We did it. Freeney, Mathis, Brackett, those guys are undervalued assets. They were thought to be too short, too small. And so we were able to do that, and we're constantly looking for the next undervalued asset. We can't, we don't know what it is, but we're constantly looking for it. So the geekdom, if you will, provides us with wonderful tools to do that. And there are, Jonathan alluded to it, there are measurables that we use that are inviolate in terms of personnel selection. It doesn't matter what the scout has to say. If that player doesn't meet the bottom line from a metric standpoint, he is not going to get on the board. It's really that simple. Because over time, our analysis of statistics tells us that this is what it takes to play successfully at the National Football level. So that part of it is good and growing and getting better. I would add this caveat in agreement with Bill: speak English, please. I have a very hard time, understanding all the mathematics of it. And by the same token, like Jonathan, I have a lot of work to do and a lot of decisions to make. So if you can't make it understandable for me, then it's of no value. I can't go back and take a statistics course. I've got too many other things to do. So it has to be practical. It has to be useful. That's the same problem that the so-called car guys face when they deal with people interestingly enough, the Sloan School of Business. General Motors, at its heyday, the argument was about could the car guys talk to the business guys and the sales guys? And you have to in order to make it work. The other part of it is game management, strategy, and tactics, and there's zero out there that I've found that's any good. It's really worthless. Because our game, and Jonathan hit the nail right on the head, our game is so team-oriented, our game is so teamwork-oriented, our game is so technical in terms of technique, systems. The Patriots use a defensive system, for example, that is antithetical to ours. They're 180 degrees apart. So they take two different players to play, two different styles of players, types of players to play, and tactically, they're totally different. The techniques are completely different. So one size does not fit all, as it does in baseball, or it may in basketball. I don't know enough about basketball to tell you, but we've talked a lot with baseball people, and there's a clear divergence there. And so ideally, if you could find a stat person who's played football and maybe been a military officer, you might have the you might have the complete.
I bet a few hands go up out there.
You might have the complete person, but on that side,
hasn't some of the stuff helped you, like some of the specialty stats, like if we attack this cornerback and he's in one-on-one coverage, he gets this many stops per season or whatever?
No, because you have to know what the coverage is, you have to know what the matchup is, you have to know who the other receiver is, you have to know what the game situation is, you have to know what the down and distance is. Was it 2 minutes?
So you don't rely on that at all?
No.
You feel like every situation is sui generis.
Yes.
So that you don't have a sample.
Well, you do have a sample over the course of the season. You develop a sample, but it's not a big one. It's not enough. I wouldn't think it'd be enough to make people here comfortable that it would be valid.
Before I move on to Daryl, I have a question for you because how long have you run the Colts for?
13 years.
And before that, you were
11 years with the Bills and 4 years with Carolina.
so
I can't hold a job.
We're ready for him to retire and move on.
But is the kind of advice or the kind that you're being offered radically different now than it was 20 years ago?
Our focus is different. Our focus is
But
different.
is it more complicated? Is people
Yeah,
presenting stuff to you that you have to say, I don't understand this, so I can't.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that wasn't true 20 years ago.
No. The advent of the computer, of computer analysis, computer lingo, so to speak, all of that didn't exist 20 years ago. So it's a struggle. And I once asked the computer guy, why isn't the computer friendly? Why can't I use it like my cowboy remote to run the film back and forth? And he said, well, because we're engineers. We don't design it for you.
All right, anyway, we'll come back to this. But Daryl, you are the leading edge in the NBA.
Not anymore.
Of the stats movement.
What, are you now?
No, but you're the
No.
only, but you're the only guy who's running a team. I mean, this is very interesting to me because I meet, because of Moneyball, the kind of people who are interested in this stuff and who are running teams have one way or another I've come into contact with. And there's this horrible anxiety, and maybe it's the greatest in baseball, that even if you are, it's almost the more you're using statistic analysis to make your decisions, and the less you're relying on the wisdom of old scouts, the more you try to disguise it. The last thing Theo Epstein wants to seem like is a geek. The last thing that the geekiest front offices are doing their best to say, oh, we blend these things. Actually you're exaggerating our use of statistics. And it's a public relations gesture. You're the only one I've met who refuses to make that gesture. And you said to me, when I came down to write a piece about Shane Battier, I said something about, you're not doing a very good job covering up who you are. And he said, I can't hide it. There's no point in even trying to hide it. But in fact, you're also the largest of the geeks. So you could hide it. Yes, you're large. You're large and manly, and you could fool people into thinking you possibly played something, which most of them can't. And so, why don't you try? But to you, I ask. There's this movement that's going on. It seems to be an irresistible force. What do you think are the dangers and the risks inherent in the movement?
Well, I think there are some risks, and can I answer your first question first, and I'll get to that? Which is,
about
what do we hate?
how you
So
got to be so
one of the
manly.
big things that you struggle with is the term Moneyball. Just the perception of that to the reality, and I do feel like it's my job to explain things. And I thought the best anecdote I had of that was I came in to replace a legend, really. The Rockets won 2 titles, Carol Dawson. Obviously not, more of a traditional basketball guy. And it literally was like my second day with him. And this gets to the misperception of using data and analysis. He said, well, you know what? I've heard you've got this, way to analyze the draft, and that's good because that's really hard. Like, he's like, I never knew who to take, and you know who to take. And I was like, no, wait a second. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work. You mean you don't have the answer? What? Well, why are you here if you don't have the This is the question I had that I couldn't answer. The owner told me you knew the answer to that. So it's just explaining. It really raises the questions. And I think, so your question is, what is the worry here? And I do think, as we talked before, I think it's real, and you know it better, you studied it. Really the MIT and Chicago Geeks economists run amok on Wall Street caused a lot of problems. They kept leveraging and believing in the foundation of what they were doing without checking where it could go wrong. And I think there's a real risk that teams could you know, use the latest and greatest adjusted plus minus paper that's here today, or use that and just blindly start making decisions. I think they're smarter than that, but
You hope they're not, though, don't you?
Is there any chance professional sports teams could bring down the world economy in the bargain? The problem is there's a limit to the downside of what would happen.
I think if Mark won the NBA title, it might bring down the league office.
That's brutal.
I think they'd be like, wait, how did we let this happen?
You know what? That explains a lot of things from a few years ago.
It just explained 2006.
Yeah.
Ooh, come on. Tough crowd.
So the people fetishize the numbers, but don't completely understand them.
Yeah,
I mean, this is what happened. You know, what Bill just said, Bill Polian just said was very interesting. Not that what Bill Simmons said wasn't interesting, but what Bill Polian said was very interesting, but because he's resistant to things he doesn't understand. And he's saying, you know, you're going to have to explain it to me if I'm going to do it. And the problem on Wall Street was that the CEOs didn't understand it, but they did it anyway.
It'd make money, right?
Yeah.
They understood. They just didn't care.
They didn't,
Yeah.
but they were to some extent. In fact, I know people. Having interacted with Wall Street CEOs, I know that they're capable of pretending to understand something when they don't because they're afraid to look stupid. But it's the fear of there are these people underneath them who are doing all this very complicated stuff all of a sudden that they don't completely grasp. And yet, either they're incentivized not to pay enough attention, or they're, you know, there's this intellectual anxiety that prevents them from asking the questions. But I would think that would be a real risk in a pro sports front office right now, because what you've got bubbling up out of 24-year-olds is mystifying, I would think, to a generation of management that's in place right now.
Well, I think you have to have a culture. I've heard Mark does a very good job of this. You have to have a culture where there's no bad idea and people aren't afraid to bring up things. And I want people to work with me with very, very strong opinions. And I get really mad if I make the first argument against and they're immediately like, oh yeah, maybe you're right. That drives me nuts. And luckily we've got a great staff, and I've heard Mark does a good job with that as well.
Well, I think ultimately this is all a good thing. Like, you know, I think there's been a misconception of what your book was about.
Really?
Yeah, I do. Your book was about finding the undervalues in things. And initially that was OBP and things like that, and then now that's gravitated to defense. But ultimately, my question is, once everybody is thinking about can you reach like a ceiling? Like in basketball, will we reach a point where everybody has the same information basically, and then what happens?
Well, there's the concept of a random walk down Wall Street, right? Where once all the information is in the system, then nobody can outperform the system. And so the good news is from that perspective with basketball anyways, is because the NBA publishes so little data in the play-by-play, you have to go out and create your own. And so there's still we're in that inefficiency era right now where you have to invest a lot of money and time to go in and pull out the data that you need or you hope you need, and then try to bring it back and test it and make sure it works. And so that induces a lot of risk as well. So I don't think we're anywhere close to that random walk period, but there will be that point. But the good news is there's so many non-data driven, different types of data, right? Non-on-the-court data, I'll call it, that also impacts all your decision making that is harder to quantify. And there's going to be a team sports psychologist conference that Daryl's cousin comes up with and that we'll be going to, in 2 years, that handles some of these same issues. So there's so many external things, like you were talking about, capacity to learn, capacity to adjust, all these different things that they evaluate for footballers, we evaluate for basketball players as well. Because, every team has the legendary stories about the guys who don't remember plays, And you'd think it'd be one of the most simple things in the world, remember a play coming out of a huddle, after a timeout. You'd be shocked how often it happens where the guys don't remember the plays. And just, a little test, just testing and aggregating that type of data and introducing it is going to be the next generation of what we're doing here.
This is funny. It's so different from sport to sport because it really, when you're looking at baseball players, I think it's true to say that you can't be too stupid to play baseball. I think that's true. You might be able to provide me with a counterexample, but I haven't heard it. But it is true. It is when you get to basketball and football, and football especially, that these other things do matter. One of the things I wonder about, I mean, both football and basketball, I love you, the football people and basketball people that independently discuss this, is, baseball, to some extent, might have been a bit of a red herring in that it's so relatively easily analyzable compared to these other sports. That, on the one hand, maybe that means that there are even bigger advantages in the other sports because it's so hard to do. When you get there, you're going to have a bigger advantage. On the other hand, it might mean that maybe they're just unanswerable. These are unknowable. They're unknowable things, more unknowable things in football and basketball.
I don't think that. I don't. Excuse me. Go ahead, Joe.
No,
No. Go ahead.
This is the only time they're pulling.
you're a lot smarter than me.
Fight.
Go for it on fourth. No, don't go for it on.
We'll discuss that later.
All right.
I think you come down an experience curve. So is it harder to know? Yeah, it's harder to know for the people that have been in the game a shorter period of time. But to Bill Simmons's point about do you hit a ceiling, I think in football it's impossible to hit a ceiling because Bill Polian said it best. Different teams play different schemes, different offenses, different defense. You're looking for a different type of player, and then you layer the salary cap on top of it. And really in football, you're going to get judged at the end of the day about how well you go out and find the talent that fits your system. That's step one. But then how well you sign it under the rules of the salary cap so you leave yourself more assets to play with and be flexible with. And then once you've found it, once you've signed it, how well you coach it up. And then once you've even done all of that, there are all the other variables that come during the course of a season. And that's why there's never going to be a perfect answer. And when Bill says you don't get enough data points during a season to really evaluate a player in a specific type of situation, I think that's where experience curve comes. And maybe unlike other sports like in baseball, I would believe that younger people who understand the game and understand statistics really do have a competitive advantage. In a game like football, Bill Polian, who has that tremendous experience in terms of years, but also an intellect to go along with it, that's really the most powerful. And in football, if you can combine those two things, you really do have a competitive advantage.
Do you have this situation in football that you have in baseball where older, wiser scouts are being displaced by new quant guys? Is a different kind of person coming into the game because of this movement, or is it not happening so much?
Well, there is a different kind of person coming into the game. Number one, there's more money in the game than there ever has been before, so that attracts people who may not necessarily be in the game because they absolutely love it, or maybe they can't do anything else but be in the game. They have options, but that's only a small part of it. I think the point that was made before about management and senior, older management, not that I'm pointing any fingers, but
you're 25. Actually.
Yes, correct. And I'm about to fall over. You have to, if you're going to manage properly, bring in younger people who have new ideas, who speak a different language, who are current with what's going on, for the very reason that you pointed out about Wall Street. Because if you stay in your own cocoon and don't expose yourself to newer and more and things that you don't naturally understand, you're going to find yourself so far behind the curve that you'll never get out from under it. So that part of it, the good news is that there's, at least from my perspective, there's lots of jobs for young people with great and bright new ideas. The second part is just to carry on from what Jonathan said. Football is so complex that there's a whole new industry out there waiting to start that no one has yet started, which is to develop a way to quantify all that goes on, 22 guys, 60 times a game, executing different and completely unrelated techniques. How do we measure that? How do we measure that beyond saying this guy can play, that guy can't play?
Talking about styles, like what styles would work the
Well,
best?
it's not style. It's really it's tactics, strategy, and technique.
Yeah.
And the Wolf Fork plays 180 degrees differently than do our defensive tackles. And to measure them on the same plane is impossible. You can't do it. So what's the formula that allows me to measure how Wolf Fork would do in our system, or allows Jonathan to determine what he ought to pay Wolf Fork within the context of someone else in the league, in the context of Peppers?
Right. And I think the important point about that, and then what Bill does in his organization, Bill Belichick does in our organization, and I think the Colts are very lucky and we're very lucky, is to have somebody who really understands the system, is the architect of it, and knows football players who can also understand the salary cap and the nuances of it and how to get value or do what Bill's done brilliantly in the draft, assets that fit his system, but because they're draft picks, you're getting an undervalued asset. That's when you're developing a competitive advantage. And if you don't have somebody at the top of an organization of a football team who gets both sides of the house, I think it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to be successful.
We'll come back to this, but I want to add the question I would love you to, Mark, maybe you can take this, is do you think that basketball teams have intellectual advantages now, that they're teams that know things that other teams don't?
Yes.
No question.
You think that too?
Yeah, because some teams are cheap. I have season tickets to one of them. You think Donald Sterling even knows what like PER is? Do you think he's ever even like glanced at it? I mean, give me a break. Mark has a huge advantage over an owner like that, and he knows it, even though he can't say it.
All you got to do is look up lineups played,
Yeah.
and you can see, I mean, even lineups played by teams against certain teams, or in their wins versus their losses, and just slice and dice different ways. And you can see somebody's not communicating with their coach, or they don't have the information.
What tips you off as to whether another team is well-informed or not well-informed?
I'm not going to tell you. Like the Blazers. No, I mean, you can just tell by the lineups they run. You know, if you know that these 5 guys together against our 5 together, you know, there's times when you see a team put a certain combination on the floor, and you just get excited because you know those.
Can you give me an example? Give me an example.
I don't want to pick on specific teams.
All right.
I'll probably end up getting fined for, you know.
I have a good example. Like when you're making a trade and you convince the other team to throw in Brendan Haywood as an afterthought. So maybe an example like that, I don't know. Somebody who could get 20 rebounds a game, kind of secretly, quietly.
Yeah, but in one of the presentations before, Brendan Haywood only blocks 31% of shots that are 2-point shots, and so he was an overvalued center, you know, according to this other presentation.
Ooh. But so, but on court, if you look at on court strategy, what a team is doing, you know, Daryl, I know, has some things he looks at that it tells him that another team may be not thinking about the game the same way he is.
Well, I can talk in the abstract. Mark could too, but he hadn't thought. Just you can watch the defense of another team now, and based on what they're trying to take away, it tells you a lot about how sophisticated they are. Like, do they know the efficiency of the shots on the floor? And the teams you play that know that, they're guarding you in a certain way, so you can tell pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, because it's so simple to do some basic stuff now, because you can get, it tells you how many feet away from the basket, you know, a shot is, and even in a basic play-by-play. And you know if a guy shoots 17% from this spot on the floor and they're trying to take it away, you know, whereas when we're doing those, I mean, I know the stats, right, for better or worse, and if I see that guy in that spot, I'm yelling, shoot it, you know? I'll give you an example, because he used to play for Ryan Hollins. You know, Ryan Hollins was 15 feet away from the basket, and he's thinking, you can just see it in his face, thinking about shooting it. And I'm screaming, shoot it, Ryan, shoot it. You know, and I may go in, but still, you know, you want the odds to play in your favor.
Well, isn't in basketball that I think one of the biggest secret challenges that you don't hear talked about a lot is that the teams that have the awesome information a lot of times have trouble convincing the coaching staffs to use it. Does that happen in football too? Or
No, it's just the reverse. Maybe because football had the all-22 video before any other sport did. Football coaching is about as far advanced in terms of the analytics that Mark points out beyond any other sport. I'll give you an example. The Pats play a coverage where it's man-to-man coverage with 2 safeties over the top, called cover 2. So do we. They play it dramatically differently than we do, and they play it dramatically differently by player depending upon who they're matched up against. And so if you watch 8 Pats films, you would see them play cover 2 4 different ways. After you watch those 8 tapes, you say, well, okay, I see what they're doing. They're playing matchup here. They're matching up their strengths versus our weaknesses and our tendencies. That's been going on with football and computers since I've been in the game, which starts in 1965. So not professionally, but in the game since 1965. So we're very far ahead there. And the coaches live by that. I mean,
football coaches in the NFL, in your experience, aren't resistant to new information.
nothing. If anything, they seek. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with computer application companies because they think they can find an edge. I don't know that they get it, to be truthful with you.
Do you agree? I agree completely with Bill, and I think they're only limited by their own intellectual ability to then take that data and do something with it. I think they're all open to it. Some are just more intellectually capable than others. And I'll tell you, I've been lucky because our first year in the league, and the reason we bought into the league was the salary cap. We came into the league in '94. And I've had the chance to work with Bill Parcells, Pete Carroll, and Bill Belichick, all of whom I think people would say are pretty good coaches. Their intellectual capacities are all dramatically different. And without going into
Without going into what?
Without going into where each of them have their own strengths and weaknesses, I would just say that all of them would gravitate to what Bill was just saying, but some of them, or individuals, might have an ability to do more with it than others.
I would say, notice like,
No, that wasn't meant. They all have
just
their own
made Sports
strengths.
Center.
Don't read anything into that. Please, no one tweet out. I just, somebody, that wouldn't be good.
Do you feel this question I asked the basketball people, is it true in football? Is it true that some football coaches have an intellectual edge over other football coaches, or some franchises? What do you think? Do you look at teams and you say they don't understand, there's something they really don't understand?
But I think that's the nature of competition. In our other businesses, I say that all the time too. I look at some of our competitors and I say they don't know what they're doing, and I look at other ones and I say that they're good, but that's my opinion. I mean, I can be wrong. So when we look around the NFL, obviously we feel that way, but I don't know if I'm right or wrong.
But there's no litmus test like the number of corner threes they take, or the equivalent of basketball. There's no, you don't look at some organizations and say they're just like systematic intellectual errors they're making because they aren't buying into
I'm not smart enough on football. That's where Bill is.
I was going to take you, for example, going forward on 4th down.
You know what?
there we go.
I predicted on 3rd down that we were in, I know Bill well. And when it was 3rd down and 2, I said, this is 2-down territory.
I'm sorry, what are you talking about?
4th and 2.
That time. I was just talking about generally.
And I bet you Bill Polian, you know what? If you ask Bill, I'd be curious. I bet you Bill thought that Bill there was a reasonable chance he would go for it.
You did.
I did without question. And here's why geeks don't get it, including
Thank you, Bill.
the professor at IU who
That was my guy,
constantly
Wayne Winston. Yeah.
talks about why you should go for it on 4th down. That's in the abstract. Here's what happened in that ball game. We were hot offensively in the second half. The Pats had lost Banta Kane. I think they had lost Jarvis Green, if I'm not mistaken. They had another one of their rushers, Gimpy. They were playing with 2 corners, correct, who were not starters because both had been injured, I think. It had been a passing game, so their rushers were worn out from having to rush. It was 4th and 1.5 or 2, If we get the ball back, there's a pretty strong likelihood, based on what we had done up to that point, that we're going to have a good chance to win the game. Whether we got it back at the 40-yard line at our 40, or whether we got it at their 25. And they had been very successful, have been very successful in the Tom Brady era, going for it on 4th down, and their most successful play on 4th down in the Tom Brady era is a quarterback sneak with Tom Brady. So what they did was they called timeout, they put a personnel group into the game that would indicate quarterback sneak, and they threw a pass. Now, give Jim Caldwell credit, our guys were prepared for them to go for it in that situation because they had a history of doing it. That's where scouting comes in. Was it the right call? In my opinion, I think 100% the right call, because Coach Belichick knew the situation, he knew his team, he knew the tactics involved, he knew the opposition, he knew what the matchups were going to be. They gave the ball to Falk, who was their second most effective guy in short yardage and goal line. So it was the right decision from a football standpoint. As a fan, maybe you say no. From a statistical analysis standpoint, all of the statistical analysis that's done over the course of a season or seasons means nothing. The situation on the field at the time is what dictates the call. And I was not surprised, and although I don't have a right to venture an opinion on it, if it were me, I would have made the same decision.
Do you disagree
listening
with
to
any of
Bill,
that?
Bill can
I
back
disagree.
it up. Bill's 100% right, and I think it probably would have worked against 30 other teams because they would have assumed that Tom was running. And I think the only thing I'd add to what Bill just said is he described the state that our defense was in at the end of that game, and then he talked about Tom Brady, but we had Wes Welker and Kevin Falk, both healthy, both playing, who in short down situations are about as good as it gets in the league. So you're going to take your odds on that or giving it to Peyton Manning at home with a defense that was in the state Bill described.
Why do you think that the coach was so vilified in the media for making the decision, if both sides agree that that was the smart thing to have done? It's amazing, actually, to hear you talk about it, how differently you talk about it than the press accounts.
I wrote a column against it.
Yeah, there you go. Here we go. Here we go.
Yeah.
All right.
I think there's two separate arguments here. If you take the decision itself, it made sense. But the problem with that, with everything that led up to it, was that the Patriots were a mess that drive. Called 2 timeouts. If you're going to go for it on 4th down, maybe you run a play on 3rd down that sets that up. To me, that didn't seem like it came from a position of strength. It seemed a little panicky to me. Sorry, Jonathan. But we were a mess. We were discombobulated. The Colts had come back. I use we. I feel like I'm on the Patriots.
You're making
even though I'm
me
not.
really
It's my
feel
team.
at home here.
It's my team.
See, he's a
but we were a
Parcells
mess.
guy. He's a Parcells guy. So the Patriots were, that game was slipping away. The Colts had all the momentum, and the Patriots kind of self-destructed, I felt like, and that decision did not come from a strong place, in my opinion.
I disagree.
I'm glad.
It's amazing to me listening to this back and forth. You got Bill going through announcing, these tendencies and knowing, remembering the exact players who were on the court, who was tired. In basketball, the coach stands up, yells out the play, right?
Right.
You know exactly what the play is, and the defense, right, still doesn't know how to respond. I've always wondered, we know the play.
I've actually always wondered about that.
Yeah.
It is amazing. Late in our games, Mark, the other team has to shoot a 3. Yet the other coach, the other coach designs the play, and the players it's like the shiny object. They're like, oh wait, he's breaking to the hoop. Oh damn it! It happened again. And we're like, just stay at the 3-point line. They're coming back.
Yeah. He needs a 3. Don't go for the pump fake. Don't you get it?
I do think that the point that Bill made was really important because, especially in football, every situation is different. And there's so many variables to that situation that to say, like, it's the right thing or the wrong thing to go for in that spot, I don't think you can just say that as a blanket statement. I think you really have to look at how that game went, the guys in the field, what the momentum is, what the matchups are, do they have a specific play that could work like that? I just don't think you could just say every time somebody is on their own 30, they should go for it on the 4th and 2.
No, I agree with you
Doesn't make
completely. That's my point. The statistical analysis that's out there is not wrong. It's irrelevant because it doesn't
Too crude.
it doesn't get to all of the variables that exist in the decision.
Let me back it away rather than talk about statistics. Inefficiencies in the game.
Yeah.
Do you think that there are inefficiencies in the game? What would you say in your two sports? Let's start with basketball because we were just on football. But are the biggest inefficiencies in basketball that, this uncharted territory? If you could know one thing that you don't know now, what would it be?
Referees.
Here we go.
Seriously. Serious. I mean, think about it. When you have two teams, let's just use the Vegas line, right? And I'm sure it's the same in football, right?
Right.
But if you just use the Vegas line and pick a game that has 3 points or less, 2 missed calls, done.
But that's not it's not.
Well, that's the whole point. I mean,
It's very
a random
predictable.
component.
Well, no, it's very predictable. Officials, at least in football, are very predictable. The thing is, we don't measure it well enough, because if you take a crew and you look at them at the end of the season, the crew with the highest number of offensive holding penalties will have somewhere in the vicinity of 22 or 23. The lowest crew will have 7 to 9. That's too big a disparity. I mean, I don't know statistics, but I know that's too big a range. So the bottom line is they officiate differently. Now, what is it that they officiate? What is it they're looking for? Who makes that call?
You won't spend time thinking about this?
Oh,
before the
you
game?
bet.
Yeah, I mean, there's a scenario in the NBA where they have offensive 3 seconds. There was an official who refused to call it, and we knew it. So what did we do?
I remember the Patriots won the Patriots won the
We're talking about it.
Patriots won the AFC playoff game against some team in 2003. I can't remember the team. But that team complained afterwards about the pass interference, and the rules actually changed. It was amazing. I don't remember. Was it the Jaguars?
Hey, Bill, we wish we had that power. That's why he's so
Just
good.
snap your fingers.
It's amazing how predictable those officials.
I can't remember who the team was nor the general manager, but it was illegal contact, not DPI.
You're losing me, guys. All right, so I'm going to ask. We've got some pretty good questions from the audience. But this is for Mark and Darryl. Do you worry about some of your formulas getting out into the league? If so, is there any way to protect your interest in investment, or is it understood that your info will get out through turnover of personnel?
Like confidentiality agreement? Do you make them?
Darryl, why don't you start?
Sure, yeah, we know things are going to get out over time. We have talented people, and it's sort of part of the contract that, hopefully they'll probably go on to bigger and better things at one point. But, while we can keep it together, we try to, like, I got a complaint, someone was applying for a job, and we have our interns sign like long-term contracts.
Really?
So, yes, absolutely.
So do you think you have secrets?
Yeah, well, I hope so. We're doing
Do you
nothing.
think he has secrets?
Yeah.
You think he knows things you don't know?
Yeah, vice versa.
Really?
I think.
Do you think he knows things you don't know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, no, he has very good
What
people.
kind of things?
What is it, the known, unknowns?
Yes,
or
yes.
What did Rumsfeld say?
General areas. Give me some idea.
Unknown
what you think
unknowns.
What kind of things do you think they might know that you might not know? Where? No, you don't.
Well, I'll relate it to your last question. I didn't get to answer. What do I want to know?
Yeah.
I think the number one thing I'd say we want to know, and Mark would agree. He just hates the referees.
I don't hate the referees. Some of my best friends are referees.
Is we want to know when we take, because you were saying maybe baseball is pretty much the same. Basketball isn't as bad as football styles. The systems aren't as sophisticated as football, but there are differences in styles of play. And we want to know when we sign a guy in free agency, because that's where we make our biggest dollar commitment. Under the new contract, are they going to have the same motivation, and how will they play in our system relative to the one they were playing in? And we do a lot of things to try and adjust for that, but to be honest, we're terrible at it. And we just do the
See,
best.
that's one area I think we're getting pretty damn good at
Oh,
right
see,
now.
he's got
There we go.
secrets.
Yeah, I mean, the psychological side of it. You know,
okay.
we have people that we bring in to do different types of testing and evaluation. And, you know, there's other scenarios, like we brought up, like there's just some guys in every sport that are just morons, right? And every team tries to hide and protect their morons because you don't want the other team to know they're morons because you want to dump them on the other team, right?
Yeah.
So we play this big game of protect the moron, and, and you know, it's a disservice to the NBA and all of our fans base. You know, we should just out the morons. And,
Like people come clean with their offshore tax shelters.
well, yeah, and so, you know, the
Amnesty.
moronization of your team, you try to minimize, and you try to amplify the moronization of the other teams.
Right.
So it's a real challenge in collecting that type of data, integrating, and then, you know, that also has a lot to do with style of play, because some coaches their systems are very simple. Other coaches, there's a lot of derivative off of every play and a lot of decision making that goes into it. You know, like Jonathan was talking earlier about being able, their capacity to learn, you know, and all those things go hand in hand, because you can have all the great data in the world, but if the guys can't execute what you tell them they need to do, it doesn't matter.
So you feel you're on the edge of psychological evaluation.
A lot of people think I'm on the edge anyways,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, I think there's a lot to be said there. And as I alluded to earlier, I think at some point in the future, there'll be a team sports psychologist and evaluation subsection to this whole thing.
Yeah, well,
because-
this strikes me as the big, in all sports, like this big opportunity.
Yeah, no question.
Because these players are black boxes, and they're poorly evaluated just generally this
But
way.
the bad part is they don't think they're black boxes, right? And obviously they're not going to, that's not how they perceive themselves. Every player in every sport is a general manager in their own mind, you know, a coach and general manager. And so they want to tell you, and they have their own opinions, and sometimes that is a different type of moronification, but you have to deal with it.
Yeah. I'd say if you haven't spent enough time in a baseball clubhouse. There are a lot of guys there who are not coaches or general managers. But it's do you all on the football side, do you agree that this is like an important opportunity, the evaluation of basically the character of the psychological evaluation of players? Or do you feel like you kind of got a pretty good read on who guys are when you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do Troutwine too, right? Are you one of the other? There are 4 teams. In football, there are 4 teams. We spend a tremendous amount of time, as I said, I think in my opening remarks. Really, once you have determined that a guy's athleticism and his size will allow him to step on the NFL field, those athletic characteristics get put off to the side, and we go really deep on the person and the character. Psychological tests that we have outsiders give. The Colts and ourselves, I think, are part of 3 or 4 teams
Who are the others?
in the
Just out of
league.
curiosity.
I don't know. I just knew the Colts were
Chiefs,
one. This is this one program. Other people might have other programs. We use
So you
one of
pool
the same ones.
you pool resources and you.
It's an independent company.
Independent company that works.
And they're limited by how many teams they'll work with. But then we go out, and our scouts, we go back to junior high school, talk to teachers, talk to coaches, talk to people who knew the player, and really try to understand the person, the character, the mental toughness, the ability to learn, the intellectual ability of the player, at least in a football sense. And that's a very, very, very important part of how we determine.
And we try to take it even further in season, because beyond just who they are as a person, there's their communication skills and how they deal with stress and all kinds of things that only manifest themselves in game or throughout the course of the season, particularly in basketball, like baseball probably, where the games come so quickly and there's not a lot of downtime or chance to kind of decompress time. So you're involved in a high stress environment quite a bit, and being put under that level of stress is difficult for a lot of people. It's difficult for coaches, it's difficult for staff, and everybody's got to be able to interact correctly. And being able to test all that and being able to monitor, manage it, and then have systems in place to support it is huge for us. Very, very big.
And I think in basketball, that's been the biggest change in the last decade, is what an emphasis teams have been putting on chemistry and on making sure that they have a team of good guys. And you've seen Phoenix do it. Hey, Oklahoma City, oh, I said the name, I shouldn't have. The old Sonics team. you know, I thought that when they took James Harden over Tariq Evans, that was one of the most fascinating draft picks that we've seen because Tariq Evans is better. But James Harden for them was a better fit. They felt like maybe he was better personality. He's not going to steal shots from Kevin Durant. He's going to fill his role. He's an awesome guy. And that's just the way they're going, and it's obviously working. You look at that team, and I think the parts aren't as good as the sum of the parts together. And we've seen a lot of, I think Denver has kind of gravitated toward that. I think you guys have, Jason Kidd trade, which I was against. But I think from a personality standpoint, that kind of transformed your
But
team.
you won't say it's a good trade. You're just going to caveat it that way.
I still don't like the trade, but it's worked pretty well. But I thought last summer when Nate Robinson, who I think 10 years ago could have gotten a $40 million contract from somebody, and the summer comes around, the teams are like, you know, I'm not sure I want to pay Nate Robinson $40 million because if it doesn't work out or if he takes me whatever, and he ends up having to sign a one-year deal. So I think the chemistry recognition or whatever I think has been fascinating.
I feel like we're doing a lot of things. We have great scouts. We talk to everyone. We do the interviews. I struggle to use it. I'm not sure we're very good at using it. I think about it this way. You can have a psychologist analyze a 20-year-old, but they're not going to figure them out because they don't know who they are themselves. Right. They have no idea. Right.
And that's why it's got to be an ongoing process, too, because you want to help them learn. The good news about a 20-year-old is, in the fact that they don't know themselves, is if they've got the right personality, they can learn. Right, they're still at that age where they can learn. So it's got to be a you can't just be. You got to be proactive, not reactive. And that's what's changed. It's even in the last 3 years where we really made a significant change in that area.
And that's one thing that football and basketball I think have in common is that a lot of times some of the best values are guys who had awesome pedigree, who maybe didn't work out first few years of their career, and somebody swipes. Chauncey Billups is a good example of just he needed to find the right team and he matured, whatever. I thought when Charlotte traded for Ty Thomas last month, that's a guy, like that trade was really interesting to me because he was a top 4 pick, somebody who clearly had all the skills, but something wasn't going on right up there. But when he hits 27, 28, maybe it does. And that's,
Maybe.
And I think you see that, maybe. And maybe
look at
you
Stromae Swift. Look at Stromae Swift. I don't know Ty Thomas at all, but look at Stromae Swift.
Never went off. Yeah, the light bulb. And I think in football you've seen that. I think Randy Moss going to the Patriots is a good example of somebody that people just written off. And this guy doesn't care. And, obviously had an awesome season. So that seems like that's some of the best value right now.
But to get back to the general point about the inefficiencies that are in these games that might be ironed out over time with the acquisition of knowledge. You think, Mark, this is the psychological evaluation of players that one day might be a lot better than it is now?
Yeah, and not just in terms of testing guys ahead of time and interviewing, because that's almost a static process, but a real-time ongoing assessment and building that into your game planning and who you are as a team and your team building. It had a lot to do with trades we made this year. It had, there were a lot of issues involved that you've got to understand that it's as much a mental game as it is a physical game. And a lot of those pieces change over time.
I think there's some fundamental things, though, that can't be solved, which is, I think, even bigger in football, is we struggle a lot that by the time we feel like we understand something enough that we can make a big decision on it, the world has changed. I got a player injured, maybe. Everything has changed such that you have less confidence in using anything at that point. So I think that'll always be the case, that by the time you have enough confidence, it's going to be different.
I don't know that it's static necessarily, although I do agree with Mark. I think that the future and the opportunities, and rather than inefficiencies, I'd categorize it as opportunities, because we're always striving to be as efficient as we can. The opportunities lie on the psychological side, and they lie in the two areas. One, the ability to isolate those characteristics that are unique to both your sport and your organization. Because there is an organizational culture if you do it correctly. That's one part of it. And then the other is how do you nurture those characteristics as you take a guy from 22 in our league through 32 when his career is likely over, because he's going to be a very different person at 22 than he is at 28. When he's 22, he's single, he's got all the money in the world. 28, he's got a family, he can see the end of his career. Totally different person. And then the third part of it is, once you isolate deficiencies in people, the prime example being, how does a guy perform in the clutch, the so-called clutch, whatever you determine that to be. Once you isolate that and you identify it, can you make it better? I don't have any answers to that, but I think those are the questions going forward.
So you believe in clutch performance?
Oh, absolutely.
You think some people are just better under pressure?
Yeah.
Do you all believe that?
Well, he has Peyton Manning. Of course he believes in it.
Do you believe, Daryl, do you believe in clutch performance?
He doesn't.
I know I don't think so, but I want to hear it. Just say it.
I would say we don't make any decisions based on the belief in that.
You don't?
I think that's very, that was a dodge. Right?
Yes. Yeah. You're prepared to testify before Congress.
Yeah,
now.
exactly. Yeah. Well, it depends on what is. I'd say there for sure have been clutch performers, but it's, you know, I talk about two different things in the decisions we make: the ones that I'm willing to bet on with money and big decisions, and the ones that I try to do. So player development, we think that's a great investment of our resources, but I don't invest a lot of money expecting that we can improve a player, even though it's a good investment. I don't say, I'm going to get this guy and I can see that our player development staff is going to make him 50% better, so that's why I'm going to get him. I expect that he's probably going to be around what he is, and we'll improve him a little. Clutch performance, the same. I like if they have performed well in the clutch in the past, but I'm not going to pay multiple millions of extra dollars to buy that because no one's shown that that can be consistent.
See, we will. We will, seriously.
You will what?
Pay for that clutch performance.
You will.
Yeah, that's why some people thought we overvalued Jason Kidd, right? But I think Jason Kidd plays differently in win time than he does the other 45 minutes of a game. Now, you know, part of it's due to age, part of it's due to team, part of it's due to culture, part of it's due to time of season and need. So clutch can be defined in a lot of different ways. You know, clutch time isn't just the last 3 minutes of a game. If you're 2 games out of the playoff hunt or 2 games out, you know, of a place you want to be in the standings, then the whole game, the whole week is clutch time. But yeah, I think different players perform differently in different types of circumstances, and you have to understand that.
I'd say one thing we did with the Kevin Martin trade, even though I say like we don't make big decisions, is it came up as one of the questions, you know, the scouts brought up, which is how does he perform well in the clutch? Well, he's only been in the playoffs once. He did fine. But we looked at when they faced tough defenses, how well did he play? Right. And, you know, we probably would have made the trade anyway because we thought Kevin was a good player.
Right, and we like Kevin for the same reasons, right? We were having some of the same conversations. You guys just were smarter than us. But it's, you know, you can't always predict it because you can't look at somebody who hasn't been there and project it necessarily, but you can look at somebody who has been there and recognize it and apply that value.
I think the important thing to remember, particularly for this audience, is that when you talk about judging players, the best of us, particularly in the draft, I'm talking about football now, but I suspect it's true in all sports. The baseball people tell me it's true. The best of us bat about 550. We're wrong 50% of the time, thereabouts. So when you talk about improving a player 5 to 10%, you're talking about the difference maybe between, in football, 2 or 3 wins a year. That's a big improvement because the guys that make it in level of talent, about that much difference from top to bottom if they're in the league. Malcolm Gladwell comes in, the 10,000 hours, all of those other things. The performance enhancement panel this morning was very interesting because performance enhancing, an increase of 5 to 10% is the difference between winning a championship and staying home.
You know, just along those lines, you talk about data, what we'll be talking about in 10 years and 20 years. I think, you know, in 15 years, let's say, personalized medicine will be the ultimate topic for all sports. and understanding the variables of your player's physical composite and how that interacts will be a big chunk of how we do our jobs.
Do you see statistics ever trying to figure out if players are more likely to get injured than other players, and if you've had a certain injury, what the likelihood is that you'd stay as do you ever see it going in that direction, or is it
It's
already
already
going?
there. I mean, your Dodgers, yeah. I mean,
I'd say if anyone knows that, ideas@rocketball.com. So if you can predict injuries, a job is waiting.
well, I mean, there's people, you may not be able to predict them per se, but you can certainly, you can certainly deal with susceptibility and likelihood. Look what happened to DeJuan Blair, you know, and right now San Antonio looks real smart, but then you look what happened to Leon Poe. And it just depends on what your expectation is.
You know, with this wave of kind of quantification of player evaluation, especially going from amateur to professional, that evaluation historically, in I think all professional sports, has been made typically by people who played the game. Maybe they didn't make it to the big leagues, but they were minor league players. And what's happening now, judging from the body types in this room, is that what's rolling into the sport, all sports, are people who didn't play the game, much past 8th grade kind of thing. Do you think that matters? Do you think it helps to have played the game in being an evaluator of horseflesh?
Horseflesh.
Doesn't it depend on the sport?
Well, what do you think?
I don't know. I battle on this because, like in basketball, you look at the top 6, 7 guys, and some of them have played, and some haven't. So, you know, I think the most interesting thing for me with basketball is that a lot of times you have guys who all they did their whole life was play basketball, and now they are basically running a corporation. They're negotiating with agents who went to Harvard Law School, and that's kind of crazy when you think about it. And I think when you look at some of the decisions that NBA teams have made, I think a lot of the bad ones have been made by guys who used to be players, who understand what it's like to be a player getting a big contract, who, you know, maybe, all right, I'll throw you an extra $10 million, and that's it. You kill yourself with that. So I don't think there's any correlation for that, but in baseball, it seems like you definitely don't need to play baseball to.
You have to have played baseball to evaluate baseball.
I don't think you never even had to held a baseball bat.
I'd bring in the favorite.
Not even once. Not even know what it looks like.
I'd bring in the favorite phrase of anyone from MIT. You start the sentence, all else equal, then you can really start concluding a lot of things, and it really means nothing. But all else equal, I think it's better if you're a professional athlete in the sport than not. All else equal. Hopefully all else isn't equal, but I think if you can find, Mitch Kupchak, for example, fantastic GM, played the game. Does him having been a professional athlete help him? I think yes. I think he does. It's part of why he does a great job.
How do our football people feel about this?
Bill's in a better position than me to answer that question.
What do you think, Bill?
Well, I played on a lousy Division III team when I wasn't hurt, which indicates that I was a lousy player. And I coached for 10 years. I would say that the coaching experience is much more valuable because I learned the techniques of the game. And football is a very, very technique and tactics-oriented game. So that helps in terms of judging talent. I also think that some people are better judges of talent than others, just like some people are better singers than others, and some people are better writers than others. There are people in our business to whom God gives that talent, and if they nurture it and develop it, they're good at it. Ranch Rickey is the most obvious example of an executive who was so far ahead of his time. I mean, he was light years ahead of everybody in every phase of the game. Jim Finks is another in our sport. So it does help to have the on-field experience. Now, in terms of negotiating, that's a hindrance because your culture is so different from that of the graduate of any law school. I mean, a person who's been on the field is not in the habit of arguing with people.
Yeah.
It's my way or the highway, in a lot of ways. So, and that's the culture you're brought up with. Whereas lawyers, on the other hand, respect each other's arguments. I once was told by a lawyer that who heard an argument, and I responded and said, that's baloney. He said, yeah, it is baloney, but it was a good argument. and that sort of tells that tale. So it's almost a hindrance in terms of negotiating. Sure. But in terms of judging talent, if you have the ability to do that, it doesn't matter what you did. But if you have that ability coupled with some on-field experience, I think it's helpful.
The Mavericks, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, in basketball, I think one of the things that's happened that's interesting is the owners get a little starstruck. Mark, you're not like this, but you'll see, like, let's say I'm Bob Johnson, and I need somebody to run Charlotte for me. Do I want to hang out with Daryl, or do I want to hang out with Michael Jordan? I want to hang out with Jordan. Smart. Jordan works for me. This is awesome.
Bob was smart. He hired the guy he was going to sell it to. You can't beat that, right?
Well, that's true. I guess that did work out. But I do think, some of these times, like, oh, Kevin McHale, he's great. He's an awesome guy. He was a great Celtic. I'm going to make him my GM. And maybe, I don't know if teams are thinking that same way anymore. Now teams are looking for the next Sam Presti, somebody like that.
Look,
That
I
seems where
look,
it's
it's a business. It's a $500 million asset, hopefully. And you just don't you don't hire somebody because he was a good basketball player.
Right.
You hire the best person for the job, period, end of story, like any other business.
I also think the skill set, at least on the football side, when you're running a personnel department, you're talking about, depending on the time of the year, 10 to 18-hour days in a room in front of a screen, watching, talking with people. I think it's such a different experience than what a guy had if he played the game at a professional level and just his makeup as a human being. I think the people in this room are actually much more suited for that type of task. And I don't think, they might think they want to do the job and can do the job, but the diligence and the patience required and the nuances of doing it and the administrative side of doing it are very, very different tasks.
I'd back that up, and Avery would probably agree. We have a player right now, it's obviously Shane Battier, who's like one of the smartest guys in the NBA. And he's so smart. We ask him all the time, you could be a coach. He's like, are you kidding? That's way too hard. That is way too much work and preparation time, compared to what I'm doing now.
Jonathan hits a great point there. I've always believed that the best replay officials would be former scouts because they're so used to watching video. That's what they do for a living, is watch video. And they can see things on video that the average official who's been trained to watch it on the field in real time can't possibly see. Now, it's never gravitated that way. We've always used former officials as video replay guys. But interestingly, when replay first came in, the most accurate replay official was a front office employee of the NFL who never had been on the field.
See, I'm glad to hear that, to know that there is a varying degree of accuracy on replay officials. Let that sink in.
Yeah, that is. All right, so we got just a few minutes left. There are a couple of questions that the audience has asked that I feel obliged to relate. All right, there are a handful of teams out there that consistently have poor performance. Is it because they don't use all the tools at their disposal and therefore make consistently bad decisions? Or is there a structural problem with these consistent losing teams that we can't see? Or is there something else?
I blame the owner in that situation. Let's talk about the Clippers. We're talking 30 years now of them being terrible, and the same guy has owned the same thing. The coaches have changed, the players have changed, the GMs have changed. I'm looking at the owner now at this point. Obviously this guy is just not good at owning a team. And I think, what we've heard today with these guys is a lot of running a sports team successfully is about the culture and the philosophy. And I think that's where, we talk about what the geeks don't get. When we come up with these formulas, ranking players against other players, things like that, these guys don't care about that. They care about situations. They care about trying to figure out these guys intellectually and things that really we're not seeing enough of in the everyday statistical world, in my opinion. But I think we're heading in the right place.
There's this self-reinforcing sort of quality between the nature of owners these days in sports and this movement here. I mean, in the old days, when judgments about players are being made intuitively, based on experience, and it's an insider kind of event, the owners it's easier to keep an owner out of it because the owner didn't play the sport. He doesn't know. He's not part of the club. Once you introduce this analytical component, and it's an argument that you're making, and the kind of person who now owns a sports team is an analytical person, then you open up this new sort of interface between the owner and the decision making. All of a sudden, he can be included because it's essentially the language he speaks in his business. So that's got to be kind of fuel to this movement in a way. Is that the owner it lets the owner in, which has got to please the owners, I would think.
Well, it still comes down to judgment, though, and I'll point to the Red Sox. The Pats are the team of the decade in the NFL, so there's no argument.
He says thank you, and he's sitting here.
You actually think you created the Patriots Super Bowl?
I'm on the team.
Just checking.
As I was saying,
Season tickets, go figure.
I know.
as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted. If you look at the Red Sox, they have an owner who's obviously a statistically oriented individual. They have a president and a front office on the business side who have legal and marketing expertise, and they have a general manager who you could argue is among the best in sports, who is has both a statistical and legal background. Now, if you look at everything they do, from marketing to ticketing to seating to minor leagues to all the other community relations, all that other stuff, what they've done is meld all of the talents in that organization among the decision makers. And in many ways, the Pats do it exactly the same. Bill is the driving force behind the football side of it. Jonathan runs it on a day-to-day basis. His father is a leader in the league who develops macro policy for the league. Jonathan's a big part of that as well. Those two franchises meld everything together to create one product that the fan can reach out and touch. Whether it's coming in the stadium and parking his car, or buying a yearbook that he can give to his son, or watching the team on television or listening to it on radio. The franchises that don't get it don't meld all of that together. They're either separately warring factions, or they don't have the talent inside the building to be able to put that all together and say, okay, we're going to let, to use your phrase, the whole equal more than the sum of the parts. And in many respects, if you went to a business seminar, that's what some management guru would be telling you. You know, the whole's got to be more than the sum of the parts. That's what successful organizations do, and unsuccessful ones don't do that. Now, why is that? I can't say. I don't know. But I do know in looking at successful organizations that there's absolute correlation between performance on the field and at the gate and that kind of melding talents together.
So we didn't have any trouble filling the airtime. Why am I not surprised? Thank you very much, guys. It was terrific.